Throughout the 18th and 19th century, Chicago was known as America's candy capital. However, this wasn't always the case. The city, formed in the 1830s, was originally home to primarily small shops and families. However, as the population and physical size of Chicago grew, so did its industry. Chicago's first candy store opened in 1837 and set the path for many more. The candy industry grew with the times, aided by the many immigrants coming to Chicago with hopes for economic prosperity in a city that was gradually becoming both globally connected and financially successful. Several events in Chicago's dynamic history contributed to the city being called the candy capital of America throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. After the Chicago fire in 1871, much of the city was destroyed. Some candy makers looked to make their businesses bigger and better while rebuilding, allowing for faster candy production rates. This was possible because of the Columbian Exposition, which gave widespread exposure to the Chicago candy industry, bringing in investors who were drawn to the city's potential market. During the Prohibition, factories in the city that originally produced alcohol switched to producing candy, and bars often became candy and ice cream shops. The Chicago candy industry created a legacy in the city by creating jobs that boosted the economy and by giving Chicago a dominant role in America's trade network and financial status. This was accomplished through the work of several forward-thinking leaders such as William Wrigley Jr. and the Ruckheim brothers, who used ingenious techniques to help define Chicago's candy industry. This industry, like many others in Chicago, was temporarily halted by the Chicago Fire of 1871. However, contrary to what was expected, the candy industry flourished more than ever before. The Chicago Fire, though detrimental to the infrastructure of candy shops and factories, occurred at an ideal time. The Industrial Revolution had spurred the creation of new technologies that made factory work more productive. Building up from the destruction faced by almost the entire city, candy makers rebuilt candy shops and factories, often making them larger than before, incorporating new technologies that the old factories did not have. This new technology allowed candy to be produced in mass quantities, which had never been possible before. Charles F. Gunther, prior to the Chicago Fire, sold caramels from a small shop on Clark Street. To his great dismay, the entire shop burned to the ground in the fire. After, however, he opened a new candy factory on State Street, which housed an impressive candy store on the first floor and the factory above.
The new technology, combined with an increase in mass transportation, helped increase the popularity and success of Chicago's candy, which wouldn't have been possible had the candy industry not been rebuilt after the fire. The number of wholesale and candy confectioners reached 65 by the year 1900, and the average amount of candy eaten per American per year, 2.2 pounds per person in 1880, reached 5.6 pounds in 1914, and 13.1 pounds in 1919. This huge increase in candy consumption was caused by the mass production of candy, which was possible because of new technology incorporated into factories because of the destruction caused by the Chicago Fire.
However, the Chicago Fire wasn't the only factor that caused Chicago to become the candy capital of America. In 1893, just over 20 years after the Chicago Fire, the city held the Columbian Exposition. The fair drew nearly 26 million visitors and profoundly affected the city's industry and image. Confectioners Ruckheim and Eckstein created what later became known as a Cracker Jack by mixing together popcorn, peanuts, and molasses. Juicy Fruit Gum offered free samples to all visitors, spreading the popularity of the company as well as the product. Chocolate from Walter Baker and Company, as well as stall work, were both sampled and sold. Visitors could walk past a 30-foot tall chocolate statue advertising what was being sold. J.M. Lemon, a German entrepreneur, saw an exhibit at the fair on chocolate and purchased a factory practically on the spot, becoming a fairly successful producer of candy-making machinery.
How people were making candy and what they were making. People saw this equipment that could, mix and cook and shape and wrap candy in quantities not even dreamed about before. And of course changed, really, this was the start of milk chocolate as a candy ingredient and the candy bar. Because before 1900, You didn't really have candy in a bar shape. Well, you bought it in a box.
From 1920 to 1933, in America, the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages was illegal. Though the prohibition was not completely effective in preventing people from drinking and selling alcohol, it did help make Chicago the candy capital of America. Schlitz's brewery owned dozens of popular taverns in Chicago that had to be shut down because of the prohibition. However, instead of completely closing them down, they were often converted into ice cream, soda, or candy shops. Ingredients like malt quickly paved the way for ice cream and chocolate sales, such as malt balls. Had the prohibition not started, or had it not lasted 13 years, Chicago would not have housed nearly as many candy factories and shops.
Chicago candy companies were successful nationwide for many different reasons. Cracker Jack used creative marketing and branding techniques to market their products. The company used slogans like, "The more you eat, the more you want," and surprise prizes in each box to promote sales of their products and continual brand loyalty.
If you have a lot of people making popcorn peanut kinds of treats, the way that you really set yourself apart is a brand name. And Cracker Jack really was one of the very first branded confections. If you went out shopping for candy in the 19th century, you were going out to buy stick candy or licorice or whatever. You weren't going out to buy a brand of candy. But with Cracker Jack, you went out to buy Cracker Jack. And that was something new.
William Wrigley moved to Chicago with $32 in his pocket to work with his uncle selling soap and later baking soda door to door. Later, when he started selling baking soda to stores, he gave them gum as an incentive to sell his products. When the gum became more popular, he moved to selling gum exclusively, eventually buying the gum company. In 1893, he started selling Juicy Fruit and Spearmint gum, which are still popular today. Wrigley marketed his gum by keeping the same 5-cent per pack price for 70 years. He also sought to use billboards in highly trafficked areas like Times Square in New York and Piccadilly Circus in London to promote his products. He once even created a mile-long billboard that ran along the train tracks from Atlantic City to Trenton, New Jersey. In 1915, Wrigley sent a pack of gum to every address in the phone book, with the reasoning that every family with a phone could afford to buy gum. Wrigley's innovative and creative marketing techniques made Wrigley Gum the biggest manufacturer of gum in the world. Still today, Chicago-based Wrigley owns roughly 35% of the global market shares of chewing gum. Wrigley's success helped Chicago's candy industry immensely because it helped the city dominate the country's gum market.
Chicago's central location in the country made it the ideal spot for the candy industry, as it was easily accessible by rail, locomotive, water, and later, air. Other reasons why Chicago became the ideal location for the candy industry was its weather. With a long and cold winter and mild fall and spring, candies like chocolate could be produced for up to 7 months a year, which was necessary because cool temperatures were needed for production. Many of the 25,000 Chicagoans who were employed by the candy industry began to lose their jobs as many companies' factories were moved out of the country due to inflated sugar costs and tariffs. While many companies still call Chicago their home, manufacturing often no longer takes place in the city, as there are only 7,000 Chicagoans employed by the industry today. The candy industry brought entrepreneurs to the city from both around the world and country, including William Wrigley Jr. and Emil J. Brock, both of whom were influential in the candy business, helping many others create, manufacture, and sell candy in the city.
It's that changing the role of candy in our everyday lives, that was their biggest legacy. And the ways that they developed to market candy are the ways we're still thinking about candy today.